And back with a little bit more conversation with our panel. Judge, let me begin again with you. When I mentioned Moynihan, it was in terms of his warning, his admonition to a largely white Congress and a largely white political class. We are creating through social policies here, we're creating a social structure that is going to explode like a stick of dynamite in subsequent generations. You concur?
Yes. Let me do politicians flip on you, because I know we have limited time, but you know, we are in early voting right now, and there are judicial elections on the ballot. And as a sitting judge, I certainly cannot ethically endorse any candidate, and I'm not about to do that now. But I want to say that it really is important who your judges are. We have a Supreme Court race, we have Court of Appeals races, each of the districts around the state have other circuit court races. And judicial races are different than other races because judges can't go out and campaign the way politicians, I don't even consider judges really politicians, but it is an elective process. And I would just sort of encourage people to try to learn as much as you can about the judges who are running for various elections, and make sure you get out and vote, because if we complain about our juvenile justice or our criminal justice system, certainly one of the important cogs in the wheel are the judges who preside over those cases. That's most important, that people become informed and then try to vote on the candidate of their choice.
Yeah. Dr. Spencer, in the break, you were talking about how our choices of heroes, particularly in the African American community, the thought occurred to me, this massive outpouring, biracial, when at the passing of Kobe Bryant a couple of weeks ago. It dwarfed the expressions of grief when Congressman Cummins died.
For some.
Yeah, for some.
For
yes.
some.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely correct.
But you were talking about the importance when you were growing up about the nuclear aspect of family life.
Absolutely. But that's when, you know, you sat down at dinner time and there were you watched 60 Minutes, or you knew that the worldly nightly news at 6 o'clock was going to actually report reportable, factual information and not fluff media. But also you knew that you were going to get history within your church, within your civic organization, and you knew who made sacrifices so you could have, even if they were not a part of your nucleus social capital circle, you were informed. It was about us together collectively reaching back to pull others up compared to today.
Back to something, Dr. Hampton, you said earlier in the broadcast, do you fear what is often, whether it's de jure or de facto, a resegregation through the rise of the charter school movement across the country, but in Arkansas as well? You fear that, the impact?
I do fear the impact of that, because I believe that we are a society that is very comfortable being separate and apart. I think that people work together in the workplace, but once you're outside the workplace, you really do see that we are separate and apart. And the tragedy of it for me is that if you are doing special things for your own children, you forget that the others matter. We are in a time and place, I honestly believe, in which we're being sent the message, once again, that some people don't matter. Their children don't matter. And I heard this. This is something I heard when I came back to Arkansas in 1996. A very prominent Arkansan said, if I had known that the education of the children of the men who worked in my fields was important, I would have put more emphasis on it. I had to learn it the hard way because the economic viability of my farm fell down because the people who were working didn't have the education to be involved with technology.
I agree with that, because I think about equity meaning access. Okay. And so, Judge, you know, he was talking about the importance of voting. And I sit here and I look and I think about Medicare. and how that message of Medicare for all, but we can't have Medicare for all if we don't have access. And so you have to think about, what does access actually include? We got to get more students going into medical schools. Not only just going into medical schools, but understand the importance of actually returning back to their state and practicing medicine. Not specialty, but primary care. Specialty is going to get you that higher income. But in order to be able to have Medicare for all, we got to have those primary care doctors going back home, practicing in smaller towns, and everyone not living in urban, but knowing that it's okay to live in a rural community. When you reside in a rural community, at times that community is very strong.
You're going to be back on a different subject on a subsequent program. Go ahead.
I am
Dr.
so
Hargrove.
optimistic about this. When you see the society prior to the 1960s being a monocultural society, primarily white, recognized, yet other cultures were a part of it. Moving to the 1960s of the recognition of a dual culture society of now blacks and whites, yet there were other cultures. Moving from this dual culture society of the 60s to the 70s of a triethnic society of Hockley Pock's parents, who was an Asian American court case for bilingual education, bringing about the recognition, yet Hispanics were the beneficiaries of a lot of the bilingual education, but it was an Asian American court case. I'm optimistic for this new generation moving to the 1980s, from the 70s of triethnic to 80s multicultural, where now Native Americans and Asian Americans say that we are part of the fabric that makes this country great, to the 1990s of a pluralistic society where everyone has a right to belong, everyone has a right to contribute to the fabric of what makes this country great. I'm optimistic for these young people because we moved to the 2000s of a diversified society where we're saying women were being paid 60 cents for every dollar a male made, but we're saying we're part of this diversity. Ageism, we're no longer discriminating against the aged, those who LBGTQ have the right to belong, to exist, are part of this new fabric of the society where everyone has a right to belong and exist. This is where we've come from. We can't go back, and we won't go back. This nation is moving forward. So those who are still believing in separation and segregation, it's not going to happen. This nation is moving forward. And that's why we need good candidates who are able to talk about this democracy and where everyone belongs in this new society. These young people are not going backwards, they're going forward.
I pray that you're right.
Are you concerned that he might not be right, Judge?
As I said, we're at a crossroads, and it remains to be seen which direction we choose to pursue as a nation.
Dr. Spencer talked about access to health care. I mean, how can any population, no matter its color, advance if it's not healthy? What other, so that is a public policy obstacle or an economic obstacle. What others do you see, Dr. Hampton?
I really believe
institutional.
I believe there has to be a commitment to early childhood education and care, and I think it has to be a part of the public schools. I really believe that we need to have children come into the school setting, into high quality school settings as early as 3 and 4 if we're going to really overcome the gaps that occur because of what's not occurring for them outside. I believe that Arkansas has got to invest in their seed corn, and that begins with 3 and 4 year olds.
And if I could follow up on that, because I do juvenile cases, and one of my things over the years is because of some of the deficiencies or the inabilities of some of our families to provide for maybe what we got in our own homes. I think our schools really just have an expanded mission now, but I don't think we've adequately equipped our schools to meet the challenge. So if I was in charge of things, I'm not running for anything, but if I could control this, I would make sure that schools every school actually had real social workers, and that whenever problems were identified with children, either attendance, they come filthy, they seem hungry, behavior issues or whatnot, somebody would actually take a time out and figure out what's going on with that child, even if they had to call in the family for a family conference, and that we really approach it in a professional way to identify why is little Johnny or little Susie not performing well in school, or why is this seem to be a problem? Why do they need glasses or whatever? And we're missing an opportunity because we have mandatory school attendance. We're missing an opportunity to perhaps recognize and assess and evaluate and deliver appropriate services that would ultimately help our children be successful adults and keep them out of the juvenile justice system or the criminal justice system. I really just think we have to double down. I'm not just saying throw money at the schools, but I'm thinking in a well thought out plan, make sure you have the proper professional there, the proper professionals at the schools to identify potential problems and fix them before they become larger problems. And we're missing an opportunity.
He's talking about that true wraparound care, not just care, that holistic approach to ensuring that that student, that child needs are being met so they can go to a Philander Smith College instead of going to prison. He's talking about what preventive services, not social services, but that LCSW, having the connections to that parent, and it may not even be that parent, it can be that neighbor, but ensuring that that success is built in at a much earlier age. Age 3 is so appropriate. When you start thinking about where we're competing on a national, on a global perspective, most other countries.
What they're talking about is the 10th Amendment and how powers delegated to, not delegated to the federal government, become the part of the state to do something about the
Or
public
not.
schools.
Or
And
not.
so, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to sit around and talk about the problems, or the public going to get back into the public schools as it was intended with the 10th Amendment for the local state? But the states can't raise money. There were 4 ways to raise money, but now 4 states are not doing that anymore because we don't have the categorical grants. We don't have the full state funding that's needed to fund what the services that the judge is talking about and Ms. Spencer is talking about, and what the early childhood program that my colleague, Sybil Bunn, has so eloquently put out there, the need for early childhood education, which means that the students don't know how to stand in line properly when they skip early childhood education and go straight to first grade or kindergarten. They don't know how to behave appropriately. So now disciplinary problems sit in.
There are 35 school districts in the state of Arkansas that have early childhood education as a part of the public schools. And there, I dare say, has not been nearly enough conversation about what that's meant in communities. It's rich and wonderful, and we're not talking about it so it can be replicated.
And we have, in this particular state, over 240 school districts, and we're talking 500,000 students. Now we're about 500,000 students. And what can we do? There are not enough private schools to fill the slots. So we have to invest in the public schools. Charter schools, not enough slots. So we have to think in terms of the public getting back in public education and making it rock.
Dr. Spencer.
I returned to Arkansas in 2016. My daughter, started school at the age of 3. So when we returned to Little Rock, she was already 2 grades ahead, coming from Southern California compared to other kids that's her age. What does that say? So when they said, being that champion, I am that champion for little Johnny that's not my son. I am that champion for little Sally that's not my daughter. Because I think about where I sit and I think about the opportunities that I've been afforded. And if it wasn't for the backs and the shoulders of so many others, I would not be where I am today. So I think about the hand that reached up to grab me so I can be who I am and that God has ordained me to be.
Amen.
What? Amen. Amen chorus here. We had 4 great voices here, and it was a splendid conversation. We thank all 4 of you.
Thank you very much.
For being a part of the broadcast. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.